Oh, hi there. My name is Shaz. I'm going to talk about something I made. I hope you like it, Shaz. From Shaz to Shaz. MLK on economics. When I was younger, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I would call it Chocolate Milk Day. We would like, Chocolate Milk Day. You gotta drink chocolate milk. Someone told me that was racist. I was like, how's that racist? And then I think we settled on flippant. And they said I was being flippant. I was like,
Dr. Abernathy, our distinguished Vice President, fellow delegates to this, the 10th annual session of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference,
my brothers and sisters from not only all the Middle South, but from all over
the United States of America. Our citizenship education program continues to lay the solid foundation of adult education and community organization upon which all social change must ultimately rest. The power of organized consumers. If
you respect my dollar,
you must respect my person. We will no longer spend our money where we cannot get substantial jobs. We still need some Paul Revere of conscience to alert every hamlet and every village of America that revolution is still at hand.
Revolution is still at hand.
Yes, we need a charge. We need a compass. Indeed, we need some North Star to guide us into a future shrouded with impenetrable uncertainties. Now, in order to answer the question, where do we go from here, which is our theme, we must first honestly recognize where we are now. As long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never be free. Psychological freedom, a firm sense of self-esteem. I am somebody. I am a person. I am a man with dignity and honor. Now, power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. Economic change. We must develop progress that will drive the nation to a guaranteed annual income.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now, early in the century, this proposal would have been greeted with ridicule and denunciation as destructive of initiative and responsibility. At that time, economic status was considered the measure of the individual's abilities and talents. In the thinking of that day, the absence of worldly goods indicated a want of industrious habits and moral fiber. We've come a long way in our understanding of human motivation and of the blind operation of our economic system. We also know that no matter how dynamically the economy develops and expands, it does not eliminate all poverty. The problem indicates that our emphasis must be twofold. We must create full employment, or we must create incomes. People must be made consumers by one method or the other. Once they are placed in this position, we need to be concerned that the potential of the individual is not wasted. New forms of work that enhance the social good will have to be devised for those for whom traditional jobs are not available. We are likely to find that the problem of housing, education, instead of preceding the elimination of poverty, will themselves be affected if poverty is first abolished. The poor transformed into purchasers will do a great deal on their own to alter housing decay. a host of positive psychological changes inevitably will result from widespread economic security. The dignity of the individual will flourish when the decisions concerning his life are in his own hands, when he has the assurance that his income is stable and certain, and when he knows that he has the means to seek self-improvement. Personal conflicts between husband, wife, and children will diminish when the unjust measurement of human worth on a scale of dollars is eliminated. Now our country can do this. John Kenneth Galbraith said that guaranteed annual income could be done for about $20 billion a year. I say to you today that if our nation can spend $35 billion a year to fight an unjust, evil war in Vietnam and $20 billion to put a man on the moon, it can spend billions of dollars to put God's children on their own 2 feet right here on earth. We must honestly face the fact that the movement must address itself to the question of restructuring the whole of American society. And I'm simply saying that more and more we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. We are called upon to help the discouraged beggars in life's marketplace. One day we must come to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. It means that questions must be raised. See, my friends, when you deal with this, begin to ask the question,
who owns the oil?
You began to ask the question, who owns
the iron ore?
You began to ask the question, why is it that people have to pay water bills in a world that's 2/3 water? These are words that must be said. I don't think you have me in a bind today. I'm not talking about communism. What I'm talking about is far beyond communism. My inspiration didn't come from Karl Marx. Communism forgets that life is individual. Capitalism forgets that life is social. The kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. America,
you must be born again, America. You must be born again, America. You must be born again. So I was just thinking while I was listening to that, I was thinking, I looked it up. When did he say that? Where do we go from here? He said in August 1967. And when was he murdered? In April 1968. When I was making these, if we remember the narrative, Shah's in New York. We had just done the citizens audit. My childhood friends I keep in contact with, but they don't really understand me. Mike, a couple years ago, was like, "What? You a conservative? You making money now? Are you a liberal?" His wife is a fucking soul justice warrior on Facebook, and she gets mad at me about some of the shit I say. I don't have a place in the common dialogue. My friends who are engaged politically don't understand me. The ones who go to school, Randall Winston going to Berkeley School of Law, fucking following the Democratic playbook to get himself Gavin Newsom, go up the ranks, and then they find a place for you. I've heard people talk like this. Some of them will actually move to an area because they know there's a House opening or a Senate opening. Isn't that what Hillary Clinton did? the fuck she knows about New York, but she got the Senate seat from New York. You move within the power structure, and they find an opening for you, whether you're a representative of the people or not. But yeah, my friends fell off, though we still keep in contact. Don't understand. And even my contemporaries this year, the ones I made in New York, Dancer Girl and others, Addie. I say Addie the addict, but now she's not an addict anymore. Addie the Amazing. She's Addie the Amazing now. She's going to come out in about a week or two. I'm going to maybe take her to Slab City. She would like that place. I told her it's fucking crazy. A lot of anarchists out there. But my contemporaries are in history. When I would read history, I would feel like, all right, these people are on it. When I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, both me and Randall were like, this guy's on it. We respect truth and fucking, we respected the realness. World suffering from a lack of realness. And it seems like these guys, or these women too, there's some really great women in history. I should get into Emma Goldbloom? Emma Goldwyn. She's a fucking organizer from the turn of the 20th century I really loved. When I say stuff, I try to justify it right then and there, and that's how I get on these tangents. Who's I don't know, maybe that's a blind spot I need to work on more. But more female versions from history. Although a lot of history, it was hard for them to get their voices out. I'm sure if I think about it a little bit, I'll think of more. There's a female pirate, the most badass pirate who ever lived, pretty much. She's a female. She commanded so many dudes and so many fucking... She had her own navy, basically, of piracy. But so these friends I have in history who I identify with, and I make these speeches so that way, set them to music so that way I remember the stuff, just like you keep your friends close. I'm at home and I've lost a lot of things that supposedly give you esteem and value in life, but I have my politics and my perspective, which when I listen to it, even now, I walk myself back to what I feel is objective truth. And I realize just how turned around I was, even though I feel like I always retain a bit of myself, just the same as on a trip. And that's why I relate propaganda and the curing yourself of false narratives to psychedelics, because it feels a lot like that. You think you're back after a mushroom trip, but tomorrow you realize that today, or if I take mushrooms and then today I think I'm back, tomorrow I realize that yesterday I wasn't quite back. And then a week from then I realize I still had that. People say for like a week or even longer. Sometimes I feel like even after a month I'm like, well, I'm still contextualizing some of the stuff. Like this week I feel a little bit more rational than last week. And that's why they're a serious thing. It's not to the point that you'll cause harm to yourself or other people. If you know who you are, I think, and if you did the slow progression into the practice of practicing derealization, practice changing your reference points. You have to walk back to your reference points. This whole year has been me questioning my reference points, and this whole process, I'm 100 and some videos in, I start to realize there's a lot more reference points. You never stop, because you should always be questioning your belief systems. But I'm institutionalizing a practice of every year I'm going to, towards the end of the year, I think, question my reference points. And also I'll always be doing the psychedelics in order to check inside myself and see if there's any fractures I'm going to shatter against. You only shatter against yourself, against your own your own contradictions. And once you get good at checking those in yourself, then when you talk to someone else, it's such an easier way to speak. And people within history at all levels of authority, I find if you find some really cool shit that was said between people in history, it's usually something like that. They were pointing out contradictions within the other person. There's these two Zen masters who are, Zen is supposed to have an irreverence for tradition. You respect it for the wisdom and you meditate, but you have the calm mind. It's a really hard thing to understand, and that's where the practice comes in, because in lowering the ego, it never completely goes away, or else you're just going to die, because you won't have any will to live. So that's why it's a practice. Meditation is a practice, because of course the best meditation is death. So that's what, when I was younger, I would view Eastern philosophy like that as cold. But once you run your baby nuts around the block and realize how many ways you can waste your energy in life, I think as you get older, in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, I started to realize my hair was falling out a little bit. It was getting thinner. And you start to realize the mortality of your body. And I'm not dead. I was a young asshole where I'm going to be dead by the time I'm 30. Fucking, you can't vision yourself as an older man. But once you start cresting that peak physical, I think I'm still going to try to retain my physical capabilities, but you just acknowledge that this thing is wearing down, that this is going to wear down. You acknowledge your mortality. And I don't know if you do it at 30 or 40 or whatever, but 30 for me was like, all right, I got to make my peace with the fact that like youth is going to fade. I think women too, the women I met around 30, that's about the time too. So you start getting like losing a little bit of elasticity in their skin. I can tell a woman in her 20s from her 30s pretty easily start getting some wrinkles. For me, I have some, your hair starts receding a little bit more. That's all this hair stuff started happening really in the 20s, but late 20s. Some guys in the early 20s, their hair starts going bald, and they have a shorter spike for that. But for other stuff, for your body and your testosterone, I think it goes from like into the 30s. But definitely by the end of the 30s, start lowering just testosterone production, harder for you to put on muscle, this and that. So you just got to acknowledge this stuff. But I think that leads you to more calm philosophies of energy conservation. And that's the old dog's trick, is that like a young dude is doing so much cardio and this and that and thinks he's tough shit, but this fight's not going to last 15 minutes. This isn't MMA. We're not going to do 5 3-minute rounds or whatever. It doesn't, that's what like this old man strength is. I do with the beer belly. He's not trying to fight you for 5 minutes. He's crafty and he's going to fuck you up. He's going to punch you in the throat, or he's going to kick out your knee. He's going to do some shit. Or he might just fucking pull out. I remember my cousin was driving cabs, and some guy, another cab, he came over to try to fight him. They pissed off something about fares, and they were back at the lot. And the dude comes out of his car, running at his car, and he pulls out his mace. Mace's the guy. He's like, I'm not going to fight this guy. It's like, fuck that. That's not worth my energy. So some people are like that. They're just like, life is as much about craftiness as you get older, especially. The devil is the devil, not, what is it? The devil is powerful not because he's a devil, but because he's old, or something like that. There's a quote like that. But the devil's main strength is that he's been around forever. That's what it is when you deal with manipulation and people trying to lie to you. Don't try to figure out what they're trying to do, at least not at first. Disengage. Quarantine the lie. Quarantine the liar. Air gap it. Make sure that you got your feet under you. And then maybe you can try to figure out what the fuck's going on, but you can't figure it out while they're still corrupting your data. You got to disengage. Because if they've been lying for a while, they'll stay just out of grasp continuously. And if you're a decent person, you'll always give them the benefit of the doubt, and that will always be a weakness that's being exploited. But the reason why I'm talking about this, I was talking about peace. I was going to bring up that Zen thing. 2 masters. I love the stories about Zen masters. I really like that idea of testing your Zen, testing your logic and your contradictions against someone else. And it's all about peace and self-control, right? So they're walking through the woods, and there's a rustle in the woods like a bear or something. And one of the masters jumps. He reacts. And the other master just says, oh, I see. That's ego right there. That's like but he was one-upping him, because it's the Zen tradition is you have a master and a student, and the instruction between the two. So with 2 masters claiming rank, I can show you something. I can show you how to let go of that anxiety, even if it's a bear, even if it's an animal. We're Zen masters. We're supposed to fucking be at peace at all times. And so he makes a comment at the other guy who jumped from the noise in the woods when they were walking. So the other guy's like, all right. And so they're about to sit down for meditation. And the guy who jumped, he writes the name of Buddha, because Zen Buddhism, the tradition comes from Buddha. The patriarch came out of the West and brought Buddhism to the east, the west being like India, Buddhism coming from the ancient traditions out of India. But along the way, Buddhism encountered Tao, which was a native Chinese philosophy. And that's what birthed Zen, is the mixture of the Taoist influence on Buddhism. It's from what I've read from Alan Watts, his explanation of it. That's why his book is called The Way of Zen, because Tao is supposed to be the way. And so the Tao in Zen, that's how he explains it. And it's an approachable explanation, but there's other dogmas in Zen that go specifically in like these two schools of Zen that are practiced right now. And Japan is where Zen most took hold, which logically, if it came from the West, it went all the way to the East. And by the time it got to Japan, it had matriculated into a formalized philosophy that was no longer just Buddhism, but Buddhism plus Chinese culture and philosophy. And so the master who jumped in the woods because he was shocked by the noise writes the name of Buddha in the place where the other guy's gonna sit. And so when they go to sit for the meditation, the other guy sees the name of Buddha and pauses. And then the master says, because then they're saying, sit on Buddha's head. You're not supposed to be reverential to the past. You're supposed to look past it. Although it is a part of your tradition. And you talk about the patriarch and you talk about the history. So the guy stopped before sitting on Buddha's name. But if you're Zen, you're not supposed to let that get in the way of your meditation. So it was his way of showing the guy that we all have natural responses, whether mine was out of fear or yours was out of respect. And there's this other really good story of the Zen master who's crying and crying because a good friend of his passed, and one of his students comes up to him and says, "You're making a fool of yourself. Why are you crying so much? We're supposed to be in control." And these stories help me see that Zen isn't about coldness or Eastern philosophy in general. Sincerity of expression and honesty and flow, not thinking so much, and ego, just being an honest expression of a human being. But it's not about self-control. There's as much ego as letting go sometimes. And so this guy's like, you're making a fool of yourself in our school by being so emotionally out of control. And the master says, you fool. I am sad because I want to be sad. It's like, let me be sad. Someone died. Let me honor him with my tears. It's okay. Honest expression. That's what I really identify with Zen. I've always believed that an honest expression with no malicious intent can never be like even these, like, or my social security number on my arm. What is it? Oscar Wilde. Those who find, quote, those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. This is a fault. So Oscar Wilde, maybe one of the best, the best creators of these sayings, the best writers of these, like, you hear shit he said and you're like, that's pretty fucking sharp. But those who find ugly meaning in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. When people try to project a little bit of ugliness onto you and you're like, there's no maliciousness in me. There's clumsiness or other stuff, but honest, sincere expression of myself, I've always felt, doesn't even need to be defended because I know my heart. And when I was young, we were really Christian, and I would pray at nights until I stopped doing that. I remember talking to God and being like, I'm going to try to be the best. The best I can be. Doesn't mean that I'm going to succeed, this and that, but I remember promising God that I'm going to try to be sincere. And that's why I don't use the word God and stuff now. Because to be sincere means that I sincerely walked away from Christianity. That was this year, after a mushroom trip. I was like, I kind of like didn't really talk in those terms, but this year I was like, if I'm going to try to be a public figure, I'm either going to promote it or not promote it. But you can't be neutral on shit like that. So that's where I was like, gotta have to come out against it. It's more dogma than truth. any organized religion. Organized religion is a contradiction in terms. Religion, spirituality at the highest form is supposed to be beyond. Now, communion in the sense of faith and stuff is great, but these organizations are obviously power structures that are just promoting their own interest. That plus the concept of God and Christianity underlies a lot of the inhumanity that leads to the atrocities, the genocide of Iraq. Where I brought up the Great Brain in another video just past. We're allowing Iraq to go through a genocide, and the reason why we're allowing it, a lot of that subconscious reason, I think, is that our Christian bias. That we don't care as much about Muslims as we do if it was a Christian country. America's not maybe a majority Christian anymore, but a lot of the people who turn a blind eye, maybe subconsciously, are just like, you know what, you shouldn't have been born a Muslim, right? That's my proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm American. Won't forget the men who died as long as they were also American. Proudly stand up and walk a beer from the fridge to my TV. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this couch. God bless the USA. What was it? If Iraqi had to bury his daughter and his wife. That's why I do these poems. Trying to capture the shit that I see. And some of it might be raw. Some of it might be like, oh, that's not. There's other ways that you could say that. Here we go. I'm proud to be an American couch owner. Just those lines. What is it? That's also why I'm doing these videos, in case people question what I wrote. I'm trying to give my own opinion. If tomorrow all the things were gone he'd worked for all his life, and an Iraqi had to bury his children and his wife, he'd curse his Arab stars to be living there today. 'Cause his flag is still the wrong one, and his tears won't make that change. Like, that's as simple as the logic goes. That's all the prosecutors of the American empire have. Say, well, fuck, I'm sorry if your flag's the wrong one. Your tears ain't going to change that, though. You lost in the lottery of nationalities, and because of that, you were born to be oppressed by us. The age-old story, excuse of empire, is, well, fuck, that's just the way it goes. That's the world as it is. As Ben fucking cocksucker Rhodes says. That guy's around my age. Wouldn't it be amazing to have a conversation with someone like that? How do you justify, is this why you smoke cigarettes? Someone told me. People who smoke cigarettes don't love themselves. How do you justify your role in this world? What are your value systems? What do you believe? It's kind of hard to see from the outside what you believe. Who are you? What type of man are you? How do you sleep at night? How are you going to raise your children? Samantha Powers, her son asked her in the limo. He calls her a liar. And they caught that on the fucking last years. This people, that's why this year I'm realizing how little people are self-aware. And then that's allowing me to put down some of my animosity, because they don't deserve debate. Because they don't even know the shit coming out of their mouths. They don't even know how they look or come off, because they've internalized the values of this power structure in order to survive within it. So they don't even realize that they're coming off as inhuman. Her son, her child is calling her a liar. She's like, why do you call me a liar? You think mommy's a liar? It's like, yeah, because kids can fucking tell. Kids can fucking tell. She's one of the most mendacious public figures right now. The more you build up your virtue without a base of actual facts to back it up, the funnier it looks. So she's writing a book. She wrote that book that got optioned into a movie, The Eternal Flame, about the guy who was killed, the peacekeeper who was killed in the UN. She goes all around the world talking about human rights. And then she supports American empire. So the hypocrisy only grows heavier and heavier. And that's what the culture in America is, drowning in hypocrisy. The canaries in our mine shaft who are fucking shooting people It's the hypocrisy that's killing us. And the bullets are just the symptoms, right? The hypocrisy of any Barack Obama appearance. What is his claim to fame? He gave us health care. He was a corporatist. There's nothing about his presidency that showed that he would go against corporate interests and actually be for human individual rights. He tweeted, "We've been waiting for you and we're with you," to the protesters against Trump. This is the same man who used the fusion centers in order to coordinate national repression of our protests in Occupy Wall Street. The hypocrisy is so self-evident that it's beyond satire. But we can only speak that way about Donald Trump, because they only let the clown get crucified. Yeah, because I guess that's what catharsis is. You need a scapegoat. You need a public hanging in order to let the frustration be vented. But with the internet, with other stuff, you can't really keep this good stuff contained anymore. So what are you going to do? We will see. We will see what the response is. That's what I was thinking about MLK. He was killed August 1967. He said this speech, and then 1968 April he's killed. So September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, 8 months. JFK, another guy that I question his values because of the stories that come out about the misogyny and his father and other stuff. Put in his brother as Attorney General, even though maybe they were good people, but it's not really respecting democracy. The Bay of Pigs, it was failed, but he did greenlight that. But 5 years before he was killed, he came out against Pax Americana, which is a huge term, because the Pax Britannica is the British peace, the defense of the empire, saying that Britain controls a quarter of the world and a quarter of the world's population, but that's how we keep peace. The only defense of the dictator or the authoritarian is that this is the best way to keep peace. Pax being the Latin word for peace. So Pax Americana is a term for American empire. And JFK, 5 months before his assassination, said, not a Pax Americana, but sustainable peace, promoted not through the weapons of war, but through mutual understanding. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all times. He was starting to articulate a philosophy of peace beyond merely America being the policeman of the world. He dies within 5 months. Now, MLK here, 8 months before he's assassinated, is articulating something that is only coming out now within the last 5 years, maybe. So this shows me that I'm a little bit ahead of the curve. When 8 years ago, I was digging into MLK and being like, okay, this is really radical shit. Fucking, this is, when I'm reading anarchism now from the 19th century, so the 1800s, seems like anarchist thought. I didn't really know the theory behind it, but it developed after the revolution in France, and there were two communes, one about 100 years apart, one in like 1790s and then one in the 1870s. And then there's an international gathering of anarchists, well, basically socialists, which just, they believe that the world's so fucked up, we need to take the means of production out of private hands and put it into a central body in order to distribute it we need to have it for the benefit of all of society. Which all intellectuals have believed in some form or another. In the Federalist Papers, when you read about it, when they talk about taxation and a strong central government, they talk about no matter how much money you make it off of all of society. They gave you the tools to make that money and the stability in order to earn your living, conduct your trade. So you owe society something. So any intellectual who's not merely arguing a point because they're being paid to argue a point acknowledges throughout civilization that you owe civilization something for making your wealth. You can't just make your wealth and turn your back on civilization. Whether you owe them taxes or public works, Carnegie building all those libraries, or was it Rockefeller? So just socialists believe that all of the means, and during the Industrial Revolution, the worker was getting fucked, and so the response was, well, let's just take all the means out of the capitalist hands. And they were having these international gatherings where that's where the anarchists apparently and the communists split, is the anarchists wanted decentralized way to do that, and then the communists believed that you could centralize all the power and then eventually lead. Both of them had the same utopia in mind, an anarchist utopia, which is the non-state utopia. Both of them recognized that the nation state was becoming too powerful, and that was 100 years, 150 years ago. So we can see that's what I really like about history. Who placed their money on the table, on what numbers, and let's just see how it played out. Who was right? The anarchists were right about a lot of shit. So this stuff that Martin Luther King Jr. is talking about towards the end of his life was kind of stuff that they were talking about 100 years ago, right after the Industrial Revolution. It seems like in history, or just logically in any system, you have a impetus, an inciting incident, if you would, if we're writing the screenplay, that starts the action. And then you have a plot structure based off of feedback loops. The inciting incident of capitalism was the Industrial Revolution, as it seems to do in human progress. New technological innovation creates more efficiency, which creates more power, and then the power is going to go somewhere in the form of money, accumulated power. That's the same thing. Modern banking came out of the Crusades, which increased trade routes, which increased a lot of money coming into the Italian city-states in the 1300s. And that gave us two things. It gave us modern banking, 1300s to 1600s, and the Renaissance. Because now you have this extra money, now you have people who can promote the arts. Also at the time you have the New World being discovered, right? In 1492, so 1500s, 1600s, you also have a lot of money coming from the New World. We have all this money, now we have the nation states, and countries are realizing around the 1600s, was it 1648, Treaty of Westphalia, we should have more peace between nation states. We're fighting each other, we're wasting our money. They're noticing maybe we're just being manipulated by the creditors who are funding both sides of a lot of these wars. And then you have, so you have all this money coming in from increased trade and the New World and stuff. But then you have the Industrial Revolution, which is what, mid-1700s to mid-1800s. So now you have a lot more money, not just from trade, but now manufacturing. But now the split between the haves and the have-nots are getting so much that you have a response. And the response is socialism, pretty much, is the response. Now, how that socialism was, the strategies to go about achieving it are either the communists or the anarchists, or now we have democratic socialism. But it's a counter to power being concentrated in a small sphere of people. The industrialists were running away with all the fucking production of humanity. And did they deserve it? This technology is always a building on the past, and the past is all of our inheritance. So the winners of today, how much do they deserve it based off of their ingenuity, and how much do they deserve it for being in the right place at the right time? Elon Musk is a smart guy. Is he a genius? He's kind of a funny guy. A genius wouldn't frame the world in certain ways that he does. He's very driven, puts a lot of time and effort into his stuff. How a genius would be someone who could afford to be lazy, though, right? Because they would be someone who is so naturally gifted that they don't have to put as much time and effort into stuff. A genius, I don't think, a genius could have a work ethic, but I think a sign of genius is that they're lazy, is that they figure out how not to work themselves to death. So that's one of the hits against his genius. Another one is a lack of peace. I think genius should manifest itself in other areas, one of those being like spiritual, like you should have some sort of peace. And blind spots, his blind spots are too big for him to be a genius. He does stupid shit repeatedly. He gets run by women too. Picks some questionable encounters with women, so that's been a blind spot for a while. I would have thought he started working on it by now. But some of the shit he says about politics and about quality of life, how some of the maids in Hollywood have a better quality of life of some of the fucking middle class in South Africa, so it's all relative. He doesn't appear to be someone who's read history or tried to apply his own. I think any intelligent person eventually wants to contextualize their own existence within the larger scope of history. And a little bit of reading of the dominant narrative will show you how biased it is. So you'll start searching out your own sources. And we all should start arriving at this greater, larger narrative, which is objective reality. That's why I can recognize in what Martin Luther King Jr. is saying, a lot of the stuff that people were saying 100 years ago in the first reaction against the emergence of capitalism after the Industrial Revolution. Is, yeah, they were saying that we need to socialism. Well, no, that he's talking like a form of communism, which is what a basic guaranteed income is. It's saying we, just because someone's born at a disadvantage doesn't mean that they deserve that disadvantage. And we can treat the symptoms of the problem, or we could just treat the problem, that everyone deserves a certain basic minimum. Above that, let's allow the markets to flourish. And that's why he says, don't think you have me in a bind. My inspiration didn't come from Karl Marx. He's so good at hanging on syllables. Because he's not trying to say that all of society should be set up in communes, communism, right? Because that's a big, when you read history, you realize what Karl Marx, I'm going to read him eventually, but right now I'm just reading anarchism, so he's coming into it as the anarchist split from the communist. And that's his problem. What it appears that his blind spots were, for all of his genius of being an economic historian, is that he was an authoritarian. And those are, I mean, he lived this is other stuff I've read. He lived at home with like a funny situation with his wife, but he was also fucking the maid. He was pulling on Arnold Schwarzenegger. So those people who, it's cool if he was open with everyone about it. And I think like Sigmund Freud too, is these people who have blind spots in their sexuality. That's why I like Jung more than Freud, because Jung broke with Freud because he noticed that this guy's blind spots, personal blind spots, are getting in the way of his scientific discovery. Maybe Nietzsche too, his blind spots got in the way of that stuff. So you can have insights, but those blind spots are really a bitch. And no one's perfect, but I like the people who seem somewhat more self-aware than the average person. Bakunin, reading about that guy, had a lot of blind spots, but he seemed to have been a sincere individual. Right now I'm on Kropotkin, the prince, anarchist prince. He seems like I like the guys that everyone universally says, this was a good dude. Him and Proudhon. Proudhon too seems like a really good, universally acclaimed dude. But these guys, the things they said stand the test of time. Like Proudhon, really, I'm reading Woodcock, and even Woodcock didn't give him the credit because he didn't see the technological revolution that these other guys kind of predicted. They predicted that, like, if we had, I'd have to read their stuff, which I'm realizing all I ever wanted to do in life is read and synthesize big ideas, find my place in history, and join the conversation what's been going on ever since we fucking crawled out of the trees, right? And I always thought I had an aptitude to do that, but I knew I had to get actual experience in the world, which is what I did as much as I could and check my blind spots. And now I feel like it's time to get back into the intellectual trenches, which is ironic because I've given up on my comfort to do that. It's like when I had the apartment, I was so invested, and that's why I'm doing this publicly, so that way maybe other people can benefit from the journey. But when I had the apartment, I had the stability and the comfort and all my books around me, but I didn't have the right values because I had internalized society's values enough to survive within it, to socialize, to fuck the Parisian down the hall. But then, now that I'm getting back to my values, my hard-won values that I stored in all these breadcrumbs, every one that I remember, and the more history I read, and reading these old anarchists, I'm like, you know what, they're right though. You have to give credit where credit's due. MLK came back to the fucking socialist. Not saying he's a socialist or a communist, but at the very minimum, we need to raise that safety net up. Fucking welfare, government housing programs, add up all the entitlement programs, and it's cheaper than a basic guaranteed income. So just give them the fucking money. That's an anarchist idea. Is that just fucking do the simplest solution, because that's how you end up with least bureaucracy. Practical anarchism isn't just fucking take the reins off civilization and let their horses run wild. And that's why I like finding the guys who actually were like Kropotkin was a genius. That's genius, real genius. Like he not only had an intellect that he's remembered in history just as a geographer. I'm reading about his anarchist contributions, but he would be remembered alone just as being a geographer, one of the first people to chart out the Siberian steppes in northern Russia. He went up there and he loved geography. To be a geographer, I'd assume you're not only good at science and all the other. He was a prince. He was like a fucking top aristocracy in Russia, serving the Tsar himself. So this dude had the best education of the time, and Russia was a world power, so the best education money could buy. And he was one of the best in his own education class. Like, he was a fucking top of his class and all that other shit, from what I can tell. I'm going to read some of these guys, like him and Proudhon. I'm definitely going to dig into deeper. So when he went to geography, you have to not only be intellectual, but you have to have decent at drawing. The architects I know, it's like they're all fucking, you have to be able to sketch shit. You have to be able to visually and spatially lay stuff out, not just intellectually, which I think is another sign of intellect. So and then so that guy and then he also lived life. So he came to anarchism, and that's what I always wanted to do. If I was going to get into it, I wanted to come to it and not just have it be a cool kids club. So I hung out with those anarchists, but I always kind of like the cliquishness of the scene turned me off. But I had this book that out of all the books I had in my apartment that I hadn't read yet, there was a good number that I still needed to read. That was one that I knew I had to get back to. So on this 2-bag Shaz trip, where I only have 2 bags to my name and gave up all my other material possessions, I kept that book, Woodcock's book on anarchism, because I'd glanced through it before, just like I kept the Zen book, Alan Watts' The Way of Zen, because I come back to it, because this shit comes at you from enough different sources. You're like, all right, there's something here. Alan Watts comes back to my life so many different ways, from women. A girl I'm fucking with in Puerto Rico, a hippie white girl with dready hair, but she fucks with that wisdom, and we vibed over it, and other people too. It's like, I'm checking my blind spots. I know that I could be a little cold, or I could be a little callous, and the females in my life who have that bigger heart, who check that blind spot for me. So what MLK was on here was actually questioning the means of production. But he was saying that we need to ask who owns the iron ore, this and that, but he wasn't asking for a restructuring, although he was saying we need to restructure America, you need to be born again. But the specifics of the conversation are just that guaranteed basic income. So regardless of, that's why I think he maybe should have separated it into 2 different groups, but you can tell this is new to him. You can see his intellectual development, is he was just enlisted, asked to come down and lead a civil rights movement. He had enough natural love in his heart from his theology, which was sincere and pure, even though it's dogmatically Christian, that when dealt with in violence, and also I guess you had Gandhi exhibiting this too, he knew that the bigger scale solution is to try your enemy in the court of public opinion, and you can only do that through love and civility and passivity, because this is a generational thing, that these people can be violent against you, but if you have the higher ground, their children are going to be less violent. We got to weed this out that way. That some people will go to the grave being violent, but children have the innate morality built in. I think science proves this too. We have that orienting mechanism. And so just keep holding your head up, and you'll suffer. And you'll suffer a lot. But the character will be revealed. But you also need the assassins who helped Gandhi, and the Malcolm X who helped MLK. You need the roughnecks too, but you need the purely peaceful people, because love is the only long-term solution. Because violence only begets violence, retributive justice. Because you'll run across these people who fucking are indomitable on both sides. And so if you only establish your authority through, that's what Barack Obama is in a way doing that. He's establishing his legacy through bullshit. which is his propaganda and all this bullshit. This is not real. He doesn't really do anything for anyone. He promotes more bullshit than good. And so it just takes, it's an inefficient way to live life. It takes more bullshit and more papering over the facts, alienating more people. You're getting some of the people. He's building a good brand, but it's a form of intellectual violence. This is one of the reasons why I went on the path that I went on this year. When I read Ben Rhodes' book and I realized, we're not even in here. We've been written out of history. Occupy Wall Street was written out of history. It's one of the reasons I get upset at flag fucker Joe Rogan, is that on his show of millions of people, he has a huge footprint and he didn't bother to educate himself on Occupy Wall Street, and instead, and I know he has access to it because his friend the conspiracy dude, he was reporting on Occupy Wall Street. That was his brand. He would report on stuff that people wouldn't report on, and then Alex Jones, he would take it into the fucking atmosphere as far as like conspiracy and shit, but like he was a venue that would give us more time than other people. But so would like Democracy Now! But then Democracy Now! Got in line to support Barack Obama because they bought the narrative, first black president. These leaders of the narratives, supposed counterculture, have failed us. Fucking Rolling Stones takes over the heading of Ramparts magazine and then just steers us towards the Democratic Party. Democracy Now! And Amy Goodman, I've read all of her books. I went and saw her speak in person at UC Davis. But she's definitely a sheep herder, gatekeeper. Steers us toward the Democratic Party. When in Occupy Wall Street, they said, all right, this is cool and all. We'd have these meetings. They'd be like, this is cool and all, but really we have to get in line with the Democratic Party now because Barack Obama's coming up on his re-election and we can't have a Republican. We can't have the other side. That's what they always say, right? The false dichotomy. But I wanted to bring that up, that MLK started becoming really radical, or at least outside the mainstream narrative, and then he got assassinated. A year, I think it's to the day of his assassination, he came out against the Vietnam War, and then 8 months before, he said that basic guaranteed income and started questioning who owns the means of production, which is the original counter to the evils of capitalism. During the Industrial Revolution, capitalism was just fucking being inhuman as fuck. And then there's this natural response. That's when people could criticize how socialism's played out, how communism has played out. The anarchists are smart enough, I think. That's why I fuck with them the same way I fuck with Zen. Is Zen's smart enough to not believe the dogma, but say that you should always be irreverent. So they're going to be self-correcting to the point that I don't think they can be corrupted. You might not buy into the dogma they've established, because they do establish schools and traditions, but at their heart is an anti-dogma which should always allow you to, no matter how low you are on the totem pole in Zen, irreverence is a part of the game. That's also anarchism. No matter how much you buy into anyone's philosophy, you're not really supposed to respect any anarchist leaders. There's not supposed to be anarchist leaders. It's a contradiction in terms. So anarchism is voluntary association. You pick the good, you leave the bad. That's what. If you're in a movement that doesn't like leaders, it makes it very hard for that movement to be. That's why I like Proudhon. When I'm reading about him, he really distrusted organizations to the point that he wouldn't never support an organization, a voting bloc, or any group. But he just wrote theory. He thought my best way to promote this cause is to push it forward intellectually. And also I like him because he was self-taught. And a lot of these guys come from the countryside, or they love nature, which is where I think that vibes up with Taoism and Zen Buddhism, is that they're natural patterns. And that's what, apparently I haven't gotten into it yet, but Kropotkin, since he was a natural scientist, he was able to add a lot of scientific backing to the theories of anarchism, that there is a natural social expression of human nature. And if we devolve these bureaucracies, we're going to allow more of this natural expression. Whether we can live without a state at all is questionable, because we might need like safeguards and measures. So I don't know if I would call myself an anarchist, but I'm wondering about that right now. What's the least amount of authority we can live with? And that definitely is a contemporary thought, because technology is allowing us to flatten all hierarchies. So technology apparently trends towards anarchism. And that's where the founder of Reddit, in that video I made earlier this year, I found a speech of his. He says, "Oh, that anarchist libertarian stuff in early Reddit, I outgrew that." You outgrew the values of the internet, then your company's on the wrong side of the internet. And that's why it's becoming more and more bullshit. Because the internet and technology has an open system. My theory is that open systems follow natural laws. Nature is an open system. So in the open system of nature, the anarchist theory is that humans have this normal social expression. That if we stop these artificial institutions like the state or capitalism or corporation, any inducement through violence, if we allow the normal natural expression of human nature, we'll have something really cool and beautiful where we'll take care of each other and we'll have a balance in it, equilibrium, which hunter and gatherer societies, other societies had. But in order to argue that point, you have to prove that in the wild we were cannibalistic and we were horrible and we were crazy, which maybe not be true. We have to allow these thoughts to compete against each other in open dialogue. We don't promote that right now. Promote the best authoritarian ideology against the best anarchist ideology. That's the opposite of anarchism, authoritarianism. It's not democracy. And that might be what the reality is. We need the best of one, the best of the other. Democracy without authority has no way to enforce itself. But democracy with too much authority, you might as well call it authoritarianism or fascism, which is what we have in America right now. How can you call it a democracy when we have so much authority vested in a central body? So that's whether I feel I'm going to settle as an anarchist or not, whether I feel like this side, the anarchist side, has all the truth, or at least the most. I acknowledge that their practitioners and earlier philosophers were right. So right that anyone of substance nowadays seems to be going back to their original ideas. So when they first saw this happening in the trend of industrialization, they pointed out some things that have been proven to be true. And then I see now, with technology, it's only even more so. We're going through a technological revolution, information age, the same as the industrial revolution. So we're going through certain things that are requiring a response, much like the response that happened with socialism and anarchism and communism. So we should heed those warnings, which are that you can have socialists and communists feeling like we should centralize authority and power. So you can have good intentions, but if it's authoritative, it's going to have a lot of bad consequences. And that's what we see in the history of communism, is that centralized power was abused, and then a lot of people died because of it. But that's why we don't really talk about anarchism, right? Because it's actually the antithesis to authoritarianism, and authoritarianism is what we're suffering from. So whether we need pure anarchism, purity makes it poison. Maybe we don't need pure anything. It seems like life is more complex than that. You give anyone a rule and there's going to be an exception where they should probably break that rule. So, everything in moderation, even including moderation, right? But we need some anti-authoritarian philosophy right now to devolve some of this authoritarian behavior, which is pushing us on this path. That's what MLK was on before he died, I think. That same trend, only he was talking about the system, the symptoms. But if he was allowed to live longer, he had already come out against the war, and now he's starting to come out against concentration of capital. How long until he comes out against concentration of power? Anti-authoritarianism. It sounds like he was an intellectually honest man. Probably would have walked his way towards some anarchist beliefs, because they were at the inception of socialism. So, but they're smart enough to keep quiet. I mean, they're playing the long game. That's why all the anarchists I've met during my activist campaigns were the librarians. Anarchist librarians are some of the coolest people, because they're just like, promote the ideas, and the right ideas will take hold. It's not a fair fight right now. There's a dominant narrative which is manipulating certain astroturfed ideas and promoting those, and then squelching others before they reach popular dissemination. So the anarchists are the people just passing out literature, and that's what I did in the park. That's why I always know it's going to come back to them, because from what I can tell of life, they were playing the long game. Everyone else is yelling and screaming and this and that, and anarchists just passing out literature. Let's just get ideas out there. If you really believe that your ideas are the best ideas in the room, then you're not the guy shouting. You just make sure they get out, and the ideas will defend themselves. It's pretty obvious. Now what's scary is when they start killing people for their ideas. And that's the history that we have to remember. That people have died merely for their beliefs in America. That, more than any other reason, is why we need a big change. Well, we need to invest. We need a lot of stuff. But let's end this by saying, MLK, we appreciate your intellectual honesty. You had more so than